Welcome back, baseball fans, to another elimination video, eliminating the Chicago Cubs today. What you're looking at is last year. We want to start out with that. Um, a Cubs team that went 21-20 a year ago. Again, they're in the toughest division in the league during a time when the Cincinnati Reds and the Pittsburgh Pirates are competing for the World Series in what would have been traditionally different divisions. But because of realignment, it presents tremendous difficulty for the Cubs and the Cardinals. This year, the stats you're looking at, they score 168 runs, give up 212, enter a game over 500. So they almost did it with mirrors, hitting 274 and an unsightly 457 earned run average because of the Big Red Machine and the Pittsburgh Lumber Company, mostly. Bill Madlock, 336. Jim Hickman was an all-star, 331. Billy Williams does his normal thing, 309. Becker's 71 card underachieved a bit. It hit 342. It only hits 297. And then beyond that, the offense is fine. Interesting player, Don Mincher, 231 as a free agent. He ends up in the offseason going to the Cincinnati Reds. And Don Mincher for the Reds ends up hitting the big home run that knocked the Cubs out of the playoffs in yesterday's series. The pitching, Fergie Jenkins, 8 complete games. Have to start there because he's asked to just keep throwing, Fergie, because you have a weak bullpen. 382 earned run average. Hooten is the number 2 starter. The other starter's not very good. Bullpen wasn't good either. Ray Burris, Don Hood, pretty bad. So now let's take a look at what happens a year later. This year, batting average goes down a little bit, believe it or not, but the ERA gets a half a run better, and that helps. Let's start with pitching instead of hitting this time. I want to look at what Bert Hooten and Fergie Jenkins are asked to do on this team, and that is pitch, pitch, and pitch some more. They went 17-11 on a 28-21 wildcard team that won in the wildcard round and lost a division series to the Reds. They threw 14 complete games. That's probably the most combined complete games by 2 starters in this sport because we asked them to throw complete games because of a weak bullpen, one of the weaker ones in the league. So you look at their stats and they're at the very end, ERA and WHIP, and they're more than respectable. 348 and 1.24 for Fergie, 315 and 133 for Bert Hooten. That's nice. Doug Rell did a decent job in the 3 spot. Rick Russell did struggle. Vulnerable to left-handed bats. And boy, the Reds have some, and so do the Pirates. The Stargills and the Pete Rose, Bobby Tolans, and so forth and so on. Al Olivers and Richie Hebners and so forth. Yeah. Ray Burris was asked to be the closer because they didn't have one. He was okay at best. Let's go look at the bats. They added the 75 Andre Thornton and Tim Hosley cards. Thornton comes through 319 at first base with a high 438 on base. Tim Hosley is a platoon catcher. He only hits 200, so he was a disappointment platooning with Randy Hundley. Really bad performance out of the catchers hurt the Cubs, it would seem. Back up top again to Bill Madlock doing his thing. Billy Williams doing his thing. Hickman dropped a little bit. Cardinal didn't get on as much as we thought he would. Ron Santo had 11 home runs, but on the average just a little bit below what we were expecting. Of course, Beckert and Kessinger were going to fall off a little bit, but that's too much of a little bit. That's 3 positions, catcher, second, and short, that are all flirting with the Mendoza line. As much as you want the Cubs to compete for this division, you just can't expect that. Those performances out of Glenn Beckert, Don Kessinger, and the 2 catchers, and still be in the playoff hunt with the Pittsburgh Pirates and the Cincinnati Reds on the schedule. So with that, let's now take a look at the Cubs' dozen players who are going to come back next year. Beginning with this fun utility player, designated hitter, in an era where there wasn't one in the National League, but he becomes a nice full-time DH if you want. Plus the ability to play some first, third in the outfield. Carmen Funzone His best year. That's a lot of power. He wasn't known for power, but he brought it in this particular season of 73, I believe. Then you have Tim Hosley. You can see how attractive this card is over here. As a catcher, he doesn't do this very long. I mean, this was his first year in 75. Starts to fade pretty soon after that. He'll platoon, again, with Randy Hundley, running it back again for the Cubs with a -2 arm mostly. His average is starting to dip, but it's a lot of plate appearances for a Cub catcher. Here's that great Andy Thornton card of 75. Plenty of extra base hits versus righties and walks. Have to wonder why they didn't keep this guy. He ends up going to Cleveland, would have hit 30-some homers for the Indians in the early 80s. They went out and made the big deal for Bill Buckner to be their first baseman. Here's Madlock. Now, we could upgrade this card. You don't have to, of course. It's a great card because he wins the batting title in 75. But still, I mean, he's already hitting .313 with this card. And you have Kessinger. Now, all you really want him to do is have good range because he's going to deliver the same offense year in and year out pretty much. C-stealer, fantastic bat handler, and a 2 at short, so that's fine for Kessinger to keep on going with a 73 card. Del Unser was not property of the Cubs, but he was acquired as a great defensive center fielder. Could make him an everyday player, though against lefties he's just 11%, but he'd be fine if you had to. He was actually a Philly. And now 5 pitchers, beginning with Fergie. What's interesting about this is this starter 9 card that got so many complete games is that it was a Texas Ranger card, a trade in 74. But the Cubs held on to it. And when it comes to Hall of Famers, we kind of want to be careful how we continue Hall of Fame careers in our carryover league. And what we came down with is keep this stats and this player on the Cubs for 1 more year, figuring that we see him more as a Cub than any other team. But that's all right, Ranger fans out there. When he eventually gets to the Texas Rangers, we'll extend his stay there for about a year to balance it all out before he returns to, well, the Cubs, where he finished his career. Fergie Jenkins. You kind of need this guy probably the most important card here. If you really want to pretend you're competing with the Reds and Pirates for the National League North, you need an ace like this, a starter 9. Hooten's not here, so we'll have to look at that in the end of this video. Doug Rowell was a Dodger early on in his career with just 64 innings, but he was left-handed, and the Cubs had to find a lefty, and this is the best guy they found in free agency in the offseason. Ken Frailing, well, he was a Cub, and he's simply worse than Doug Rowell, which is why he went to the bullpen. He is a Cub. Better to be a reliever versus a starter, as he gets banged around by righties. You can hide him in the bullpen, but in the rotation, your opponent's going to load up with righties and knock this guy around. Don Hood was a nice pickup. They needed at least 1 solid lefty, and they got him out of Baltimore. Relief 4, starter 5, but you want him in the bullpen where you can use him more frequently. Solid, not spectacular, but solid, really good against lefties as expected. The great news is that's 3 lefties, so they don't have to go searching for one in the offseason. Matter of fact, if they want to trade or improve upon Doug Rowell or Ken Frailing, they could. And here is their closer, Ray Burris. Now, he's a relief 3 and a quality pitcher. I'm not sure if he's best suited to be closer. However, he doesn't give up home runs. You'd like him to start the inning because of the walks, so he's not inheriting runners on base. He's decent enough to be a closer, but he is not one of the best closers in the game. 73, 65 innings, a 2.91 ERA. He would become a starting pitcher. So we're wondering if the Cubs might think of improving him to a starting pitcher in the rotation. It's something to discuss, because right now, you know, these are the 5 pitchers. We know about Fergie, and then there's a lot of question marks here. How to assemble a pitching staff for the Cubs. So with that dozen players, it's now time to take a look at the 8 players of 1972. Figure out who you want to keep, put on waivers, and retire. All right, baseball fans, let's take a look at the stats of the 8 players. We begin with Glenn Beckert. So we had the great 71. Going to that All-Star game must have been a thrill for Glenn with that incredible National League starting lineup, which included Willie Mays and Hank Aaron and Willie Stargell and Johnny Bench, Joe Torre hitting .363. It's one of the greatest National League All-Star games ever played in Detroit. Then 72, he's still an All-Star, but his numbers are going to drop, of course, from these numbers to these. So now 73 and beyond, he's not a full-time player. He'll go to the Padres in 74. You can bring him back with the 73 card to play second base. But again, statistically, he's getting a little worse. For now, though, as a Cub, let's hold on to him because it's always easy to trade him or put him on waivers later. So we're going to hold on to Glenn Beckert for now. Next up, Jose Cardenal. Had an excellent 1972 card. We'll have some nice cards in the decade. Really interesting player. From 1963 to 1980. What a heck of a career. He did bounce around a lot. 5'10", 150 when he debuted. Long career all over the place. Was a giant at age 19 there in 1963. My goodness. Then the Angels, then the Indians, St. Louis, Milwaukee, and then this long stretch with the Cubs before going to the Phillies, the Mets, Kansas City, where he finishes. He ends his career with the 1980 Kansas City Royals that went to a World Series. He hit .340 for them. Let me just take a peek really quick to see if he got into that World Series. I'm just curious here, folks. Postseason batting, he went 2 for 10. So I guess that's probably against Steve Carlton, right, of the Phillies? Figuring you hit .340 against left-handed pitching, and you got Steve Carlton, so that's why he was added to that roster. Notice he's not in the ALCS. Why? They're playing the Yankees, who have Ron Guidry and Tommy John, but didn't play. Very strange. Figure you should have viewed... Well, they won that ALCS, so you can't complain, but you'd think you'd want him there as well. But let's go back to our analysis for Jose. Here we are. 72 card, we just played, had an 810 OPS with 17 home runs. That might have been a career high. 25 stolen bases. 28th on the MVP list. The next year, even slightly better. We're running him back. This is a no-brainer territory. Plus, he's in his prime at ages 28 and 29. He'll have a fine decade. He'll have a 317 year in here as well. So we have lots of years to choose from for Cardenal. That's great news. So the Cubs are looking strong with Jose Cardenal back. Next up, Jim Hickman. He's going to start running out of time. 62 to 74, Jim Hickman. These are some older players coming into this Cub early 70s period. All-Star in 70. We got him in an All-Star game. What a fantastic season that was. 32 bombs, 115 RBIs, 93 walks, 1,001 OPS. Jim Hickman's age 33. MVP 8. My goodness. 71 and 72, still quality years. Now in 73, he does come down a bit. Step 1, let's see if he qualifies for waivers. If we want to put him there. Let's just see if he's got a 73 card. He should. Got to see it, though. A 73 card for the Cubs. He doesn't have that. Waivers is not an option. Here are your Cubs. This is the roster sheet. Gary's roster page, superds.tripod.com. You can find these sheets. We're looking for the Cubs, and we're looking to see if Jim Hickman exists. And he does. Right here. Jim Hickman. So we can give him waivers or we can keep him. Good news. I'm going to be a little surprising here. I'm going to say waivers. And my thinking is, we have a lot of corner outfield DH types. If you even include Bill Madlock on that list, and Ron Santo, and you have Del Unser and Jose Cardinal, and you have Tim Hosley and Carmen Fanzone. So I think he's even a trade option to a team that needs a keeper. So this is good news. I just don't think I want to keep Hickman with only 1 year left, even though it was with the Cubs. I mean, you could also say that, you know, Beckert and Hickman might be competing for one roster spot with the other guy being traded. So for now, we can just label them like this. I mean, again, we're just starting this process. We have all off season to make these moves. Next player is Ron Santo. You know he's coming back. He has to. Had a really interesting situation with the 72 card of Santo, Hall of Famer. 1960. These are all older Cub players. And that was the ability to play all infield positions. And they utilized that. Because what they did is, if they wanted to get Bill Madlock's bat in the lineup along with Santo, you couldn't have done it in the 1970s. But with a DH you can. So they made Madlock a DH. And they would, or have a DH, put Madlock at third, and put Ron Santo at second or short. Meaning that Glenn Beckert or Kester had the day off, which is what you desired. Like we said in the beginning of the video, Kessinger and Beckert had really bad years anyway. So with that, 73, Ron Santo will come back with 20 home runs and an all-star, and he'll be the third baseman. You're not going to have that versatility. So when we go back here, this sort of helps explain why we'd keep Beckert and why we'd get rid of Hickman. It's because Ron Santo doesn't have the eligibility to play second and short anymore. So if you want Madlock and Santo in the lineup at the same time, somebody's got to be a DH. Unless you upgrade Madlock and he suddenly possesses the ability to play second base. Madlock does play second base later on in his career, I believe with the Giants. In any event, for now, for Santo, he is going to be a keeper. We're also going to indicate it's 73, because 74 is with the White Sox and his numbers start to drop off. And of course, Billy Williams. You know Billy, Hall of Famer. I wasn't sure if he won a MVP. Let's go check that. And we got Hall of Famers all over the place, folks. Player of the Year, batting titles. I don't think he ever got an MVP. Rookie of the Year, high on the list. 1970 he was 2, and in 72 he was also 2. But he could have been MVPs either of those years. Fantastic cards in 70 and 72 at ages 32 and 34. Wow. So at age 35, he still puts up great numbers. He'll drop off, obviously. 72, the card we just played, he'll never present that again. That's all right. He'll be a lifetime Cub. He goes to Oakland in 75, 76. For now, he's still a beloved member of the Chicago Cubs, Billy Williams. So, you can see the offense, which is what the Cubs are known for, hogging up all the keeper spots before we even take a look at the pitching. And we have 3 pitchers. This is how you could understand a scenario where Burr Hooton is lost. Maybe not traded for Bill Buckner, but you could see how maybe Hooton doesn't come back because you've got all these guys you want to keep. Let's take a look now at Burt Hooton, a guy, this Cubs team, I think they need him. I mean, the moves the Cubs make in the offseason are really going to be fascinating because it affects it's a chain of events. You got to decide, Rick Russell, Ray Burris, Burr Hooton. They already didn't have Milt Pappas, who threw a no-hitter in 72 because they had too many right-handed pitchers. So you have the righty Fergie Jenkins, who was traded. Here we're holding on to Fergie. So it seems like, and Hooton's got a Dodger head on anyway. So here we go. He's still a Cub in 73, 4, and 5. Remember we said we held on to Fergie too long. Did we trade Hooten too soon? Here's Hooten. We just had this card, the 129 whip card. Look at this 75 card split between the Dodgers and the Cubs. Look what happens here. So he starts off rough and a deal is made. Let's say the transaction. Let's go take a peek here because we could be considering a similar transaction. Let's go to Burt Hooten's transactions. This is kind of fun. This is why I enjoy the off season so much. Trying to figure out, obviously, deals are made and I can't recreate them because you don't have the same players in the same spots. And you know the results if a team makes a bad trade. So you're trying to make a better trade because you know the results. You have the full history in front of you. So it doesn't have to match up. Here it is. He's not involved in the Bill Buckner trade, by the way. He's traded to the Dodgers for Eddie Solomon and Jeff Zahn. Zahn, a nice lefty. He's not property, perfect example, of the Dodgers right now. We have Zahn getting picked up by an expansion team. So if the Dodgers want Burt Hooten, they have to give up something else. Who would the Dodgers give up? We talked at length about Andre Thornton doing a nice job at first. And they don't have Zahn. Could it be a guy like Claude Osteen? Maybe. Osteen's career is coming to a close soon. I could see Claude Osteen going to the Cubs instead of Doug Rauch. You could even package them both, Burt Hooten and Doug Rauch. Just ship both Dodger pitchers back to the Dodgers for Claude Osteen and maybe an infielder, second or shortstop. Obviously, it's not going to be Davey Lopes or Bill Russell. They don't have Lee Lacy. That would have been a nice piece. You know, Claude Osteen and Lee Lacy in history for Burt Hooten would have been an intriguing trade if we could redo this whole thing. I think the Dodgers traded Claude Osteen to the Astros. He was part of the Jim Wynn trade. I don't want to go down this rabbit's hole, but you can see how the chain of events can spiral out of control here. The bottom line is Burt Hooten we know he's a tremendous asset here for the Cubs, and you shouldn't let him go to the Dodgers anyway. He's got a bad 74, and he comes out of the gate in 75 bad. If I'm the Cubs, I have to ignore that and focus on the 73 season. 133 whip. This is a real tough move. Or do you do the same thing you did with Fergie Jenkins and take some Dodger stats away from the Dodgers and put them in Chicago? Now I've got to understand the bias there. If I'm doing that, I'm doing a tremendous favor to the Chicago Cubs, right? I'm taking Fergie Jenkins and Burt Hooten. I'm taking them out of Wrigley Field, getting all their stats where they pitched in Texas and in Dodger Stadium, and using them to artificially make the Cubs a better team. I think there's a couple ways of looking at that. One way is that would certainly make them be a nice competitor for the Pirates and the Reds. But the other problem is it is a sense of fairness, you know, like I'm certainly become a Cubs fan and I'm cheating and giving them a tremendous advantage. So for now, we know Hooten is an asset. It's just a question of how do the Cubs use this asset. Next up, and it comes right back at them with Rick Russell. This is why you see how interesting this Cub off season is going to be, because here's another right-handed pitcher, and we know he's married to the Cubs for quite some time. His marriage lasts a lot longer than Burt Hooten's does. You just can't deal this guy. Even though statistically, well, he's got a nice 77 coming up, 20-game winner. Can't get that card yet. But you can get the 73 card, which is really nice. And the Cubs, wow. They are going to have to make some moves this offseason, folks. Look at this. We're looking like Beckert and Hickman are going to be gone. And Hooten. They might all be gone. because it looks like we want to keep Cardinal, Ron Santo, Billy Williams, Rick Russell, with one more player left, and that's Lloyd Allen. Well, there's a guy, Lloyd Allen, who does not have an association with the Cubs, so that makes sense that this guy would be over with. There he is. We took Lloyd Allen away from the California Angels. Nice free agent. You see, in 71, for the Angels, he had a 1.22 whip. Nice card there. And then we got to a 72 card, not as good. So in 73, if you want to put him on waivers, he has to have a Strat-O-Matic card with either California or Texas. Or you retire him, because in 74 and 75, he only pitches 29, 22 innings for the Rangers and White Sox. So, can you put Lloyd Allen on waivers for the Angels or the Rangers? Let's take a look. Lloyd Allen, Angels and Rangers. I'm going to go with the roster sheet. California Angels, Lloyd Allen isn't here. Texas Rangers, Lloyd Allen's not there. We're going to look at the extra players. California Angels, Lloyd Allen's not there. Texas Rangers, he's not there. The nameless player cards at the very bottom, not there. This is, of course, the first edition set. If you have bought the current version, a reissue, with all the with more extra players, they probably did print a Lloyd Allen card. But in the first edition set, it doesn't exist. So for the Cubs, they have to retire him. No, waivers aren't eligible. So if they were to go in the off season, they have 6 guys, 6 desirable guys. One guy to put on waivers who's also somewhat desirable, Jim Hickman. And actually, you know what? We can just even assume this. We know they're going to be making trades. So let's just assume they want to keep all 7 of these guys, because that'll get the phones ringing. People will be calling the Cubs wanting some of these assets. And when you're making deals, how do the deals balance out? Well, what happens is you're going to send a keeper to another team and acquire a waivered or retired player, and you're going to throw a guy in the active roster that you want to improve. For instance, say you don't want Carmen Fanzone anymore, or you don't want Tim Hosley anymore, or it's Andre Thornton. Maybe this is how Andre Thornton gets out of Chicago, or it's Del Unser. You know, some situation like that. It could be Ray Burrs or Don Hood. So that's how the situation would be. So they have 7 guys they want to keep, 1 guy they want to retire, and when we look at the total numbers up top, we're going to put 28 teams have now been set aside. And finally, we get into the red and retirements, which is what we want. As we get closer to 32 teams off-season looks, we want the retirement list to be under 64. We're expecting 26 retirements, and we finally got under the number with 55. 56 retirements, we have 55. So that's good. That means that we'll have a full complement of 64 waivered players. If we have more than 64 guys retired, we'll have a shortage of waivered players. Because if a guy is retired, we know he doesn't have a Strat-O-Matic card anymore. I can't artificially inflate the waiver pool unless I simply take players off of Major League Baseball teams and artificially add them to the waiver list. So that is an option. But right now, you can see these numbers, and particularly with that Cubs team, you can see a lot of those keepers, they're not going to find a trade partner because teams are going to say, why am I going to make a trade with the Cubs when we're going to force the Cubs to put some of those guys on waivers? So the best of the keepers will get traded, and the weaker ones are going to be part of a 16 that are going to be sent to waivers immediately. So the 16 keepers, 15 will go on waivers. Well, basically all 16 will go to waivers. One of the waivered players would go over into retirement if the off season were to begin today. That's it for today. Wow, the Cubs have a lot to think about. Thanks for checking out this elimination of the Chicago Cubs, and we'll see you next time.